Hello, everybody, and welcome to Let's Talk Stories, the podcast where we break down pop culture mediums and break down story mechanics and talk a lot about it. um, so, uh, I'm your host, Jared Moses, and I'm here with
Dylan.
Charles.
And I tried out new titles today so that people can know what you guys do here, as opposed to just with just the random people that show up every week to talk to you. And so we do that. But so today's specific thing, if you have struggled with making your story or themes land without feeling forced, that's what we're talking about today. So this is the episode for you. A lot of writers I find hit the audience over the head with a theme, and then they just leave it kind of vague. They either hit you over the head with it, or they leave it vague in a way that it just doesn't land at all. But I think that the Iron Giant, which is the project we are talking about today, does this absolutely perfectly when it comes to laying out themes. So we're going to be talking about that today, and if you're struggling with that, this is going to be the episode for you. Before we get into what everybody enjoyed this week, I'm going to let you know a couple of things. I want you guys to, if you're listening to this, stick around, because at the end, we are going to give you a 3-step process to making sure that your themes resonate naturally in your writing. And then we've also put together a thematic resonance blueprint, a guide which you can get in the show notes. So get those, grab those, and we're also introducing our Devil and Angels Advocate segment this episode, so hopefully you guys will get to enjoy that. All that being said, what have you guys been enjoying this week before we hop into the meat and potatoes?
I've been watching a lot this week, but nothing like, I always have a dilemma when my husband is gone for work, because I feel like I can't watch anything really, really good if he's not here, but also like I can suddenly watch all the shows that I want to watch and he doesn't, aka the ones that are stupid.
Okay, so you admit.
Yes, I do. I admit that I don't like my taste. But I did watch Saving Mr. Banks, which is a documentary about how the Disney film Mary Poppins was made. And it was surprisingly a beautiful story about the sacred responsibility of storytellers in our world to but make better all the trauma that people grow up with. All the sad stories that people don't know how to put into words, storytellers are able to turn it into the magic that heals. So I was bawling my eyes out to that one this week, and yes, it was very good.
Yeah, I actually saw that one in the theater when it was back in the day. To my understanding, it's a lot of historical BS, but emotionally, in terms of if you treat it as a fictionalized version of the whole thing, yeah, it is quite. It was significant back then, and there is still some significance to that that movie.
It's a biopic, right? Not a documentary.
Oh yeah, biopic.
Yeah, you're right.
I just want to make sure. I haven't watched it, but I did tell Jaylon I would watch it. But before I do, I want to make sure. I mean, I like documentaries. Don't get me wrong. I do, but I usually put documentaries on to fall asleep.
That's fair. Fair. Thank you for calling me on that, Charles.
Okay, what about you, Charles?
Well, it's kind of twofold. Last week, I saw Nosferatu in the theater with my brother, the new remake of the old school 20s movie, and it was so good. It was so good. And then from then, I've been kind of on a new monster movie kick, because there's the new Wolfman movie that came out that my brother didn't want to see. And I heard it was kind of so I'm like, okay, well, wait, but there's that. There's Nosferatu, which is basically Dracula. There's a reimagining of The Bride of Frankenstein. And there's Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein movie later this year. So there's like, I still haven't seen the 2020 Old Man, so there's like a bunch of Universal horror monster movies this year, and I'm like, I've been on that kick. But I've been in between working, with my students, between the calls of working on online with my students. I've been reading a lot of sword and sorcery comic books, which is not a genre I was really understood or was interested until a few years ago, and I've been reading them, and they're so this is like Conan, Red Sonja, Belit, I can't remember, the Pirate Queen, and all Cole and all those, He-Man, Conan stories, but they're fascinating to me. There's such the sword and sorcery thing has such a bad reputation because it's like, oh, it's exploitive and it's titillating and it's just big muscle men and hot naked women and violence. That's like, yes it is, but there's also some interesting storytelling there that's really kind of fascinating and different from a lot of the fantasy that you usually will hear about. And I've just been kind of going in a deep dive. So I'm like Homer Simpson with the hell donut. It's like, finish it, blah, blah, more. So I've been on that kick this week.
Very nice. Very nice. I have been... Well, what have I been doing? Wow, sorry. I have been...
When you realize your life is all work and no fun.
Yes, exactly.
It makes Jared
so horrible. Never had that moment before, but that was weird. I guess I had this brief period where I was playing Call of Duty, Black Ops. I think it's Black Ops 6, which got me really, really jazzed to watch the show The Unit. I don't know if anybody is familiar with that show, but it's an old show from 2000 and I want to say 7 or 8.
I'm not sure you're going to say the 70s when you said old show. Oh,
no, well.
Anyway, sorry.
But like it's from early 2000s. But it's about Delta Force. But it is I didn't realize this when I watched it back in the day. But when I watched it as like what I do now and what we do now and what my understanding of story now, that show is it's what it is, but it's got fantastic subtext. And I don't know if this is like Jaylon may know better than the rest of us, as she's married to a military man. But like the way that they do it on the show is just like they have so many different ways for saying like these different ways for saying like random things, like normal things. And it's just and they have like this completely weird way of saying it that's like you didn't have to say it that way, but you said it that way. And it's like I knew the whole acronym thing. I know that the military likes acronyms, but like even just like this like this whole random thing, like he was just like the guy was like I forget what he was talking about, but he said something about I'll leave you twisted, wet, and in the dirt. And he was talking about he was talking about like something to do with shopping, I think. And I was just like, but why did you say it like that? It was like it's such a weird way of saying things, but I love it. And it's it was the first time I ever saw I forget his name, but the guy who used to be the Allstate guy, the Are You in Good Hands dude. He's the main character on that show, the lead character, and it's an awesome show. So I've been watching that. I haven't really been able to watch much of anything else. I will be watching Nosferatu tomorrow. So I'm going to be I'll have stuff to talk to Charles about as far as that goes. But yeah, that's what I've been doing. So all of that being said, let's jump into our topic of the day. We are talking about the Iron Giant, which is what is that? Was it 1990?
1999.
1999. I was close. 1999 animated film by what is it? Brad Bird.
Brad Bird,
directed by Brad Bird. Yeah. Based off of the novel The Iron Man. Yeah. So yeah, it's a fantastic animated film that gets better every single time you watch it. I did not think that was possible, but I saw it for the first time last year, thanks to Charles. And we had to talk about it on the podcast, Deja Vu podcast, and I loved it. But I've seen it twice since then, and every single time that I've seen it, it just gets better, and I noticed more things than I did the last time. But it's just a really great show. But movie. But the thing that I want to talk about today is thematic resonance and emotional payoffs. And so I want us to get into the theme of the Iron Giant. It's a whole different movie. So thematic resonance, first of all, what is that? I would say that thematic resonance is when a story's message lands emotionally without feeling forced or preachy. Would you guys agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, resonance, this is weird, but like, I kind of imagine, I might be getting my terms wrong here, but like resonance, like a resonating chamber, which I think of an echo chamber. I don't know if that's correct, but to that end, it always reminds me, resonance, resonating chamber, echo chamber, it's like your heart. Mm-hmm. So literally the theme is resonating off the walls of your heart like an echo. That's always kind of been the mental picture I've had.
I like that mental picture. I use resonance as a word a lot, I've noticed, but
it's your AI word.
It kind of is. If I were an AI, that would be my AI word of choice. But I always see it as, in reality, like if it was a 5-cent word, to find a 2-cent word that means the same thing, I would say it is another way of saying me too. When something resonates with you, it's giving you the chance to say me too. I feel that too.
Mm. I agree with that. I think you're both correct. And so, okay, so now we have a clear picture of what the thematic resonance is. An emotional payoff. Would you say that the emotional payoff is when the audience is deeply invested and making the climax hit hard because of it? Would you say that is an emotional payoff?
That's hard because I feel like everyone wants the happy ending emotion. Everyone equates an emotional payoff with a happy ending, where they say, like, we want to be happy that we watched this movie. We don't want it to leave us sad. But sometimes you also hear a story and you need it to leave you sad, because otherwise it would be dismissing the feelings that it had brought up and allowed you to say me too.
Yeah, I think for me, an emotional payoff, I think any kind of payoff. So you got your technical payoffs, which is like a plot detail. So there's a funny joke in the movie, the movie of the show Invader Zim Enter the Fortress, where basically there's a character and they have a ham. They have a giant ham, right? And the movie pauses for a second and the narrator goes, "Now remember that ham," and then it keeps going. And then all of a sudden, at the end, the climax, the character brings up the ham, and the character pauses and goes, "Now there's that ham again." And then the character throws the ham at someone's face, and that's the payoff, right? That's a technical setup to payoff. By the way, Invader Zim is freaking hilarious, and that movie is ridiculous. Like, that movie has the line, "You're ugly when you lie, Dib." "I'm not lying. Then why are you ugly?" Which goes to my dessert all the time between us. It's freaking hilarious. Anyway, but emotional payoff, I think, is, yeah, it has to do with the heart, and it has to do with the ideas that have been set up in the story and challenging where the audience wants to go. So I think I'm trying to find a good example without getting knee deep into this movie, because I do have to keep quiet, because this is probably, or potentially probably, whatever, my favorite movie ever. So I have to be very quiet or I'm going to run everyone over. But I think emotional payoff, like in this case, is that you can't just say, "Let's talk about Superman. Let's talk about the soul. Let's talk about growing up and everything," and then just not do it. You have to have an emotional payoff of what it means. It's almost like walking the talk, I guess, is what I would say for an emotional payoff of something. You can't versus, and if you don't pay it off, then you probably will get the criticism of the story's underdeveloped, which means it's not that the ideas aren't there, but it doesn't do anything. And if it does do something, it's not, let's circle back, thematically resonant. So it's almost like, it's like ordering food and it's there, but it's lukewarm temperature. It's kind of how I would say it. I hope all that made sense.
That makes a lot.
We just need if we want, you can just make a dime. If I don't make sense, just there's the dime.
No, it
I
definitely
raise you
made
a
sense.
quarter because you always do make sense.
I would say that in addition to that, I would also say that the emotional payoff is whether or not the filmmaker or author or whoever is telling the story has lived up to, which I guess is in line with what you guys are saying, has lived up to the promise that they made at the beginning of the story. I mean, every story, it's a statement that has been said before, and I agree with it, is every time you start a story, you are creating a contract with the person who is consuming it. And in that contract, you are stating, I promise to deliver this emotion to you by the end. Genres are oftentimes within themselves promises. If you watch a horror film or read a horror book, the promise here is you will be scared when you read that. If you read an adventure, you will have a good time. If you read a comedy, you will laugh. And at the end of the day, the emotional payoff is, did you deliver what you promised? I don't think people necessarily care about the happy ending as much as I think people care about, is this going to make me feel the things that I assumed it was going to make me feel based off of what the story is about? Like, I could break your heart if that's what you went into the book expecting to happen. When I read A Little Life, I don't read A Little Life because I want to laugh for 900 pages. I read it because I want to be emotionally devastated. And that's why I read it. Or, you don't read The Lies of Locke Lamora and expect to be, I don't know, to be pissed off the entire time or outraged about the political, standings of life of our society. Though you could be, it's not the purpose of reading the book. And so, in that sense, I think, as long as you're delivering on that, I think that's the emotional payoff. So I would say, what does it mean for a theme to resonate with the audience? Which we did talk about a little bit already, but I guess a better question would be, what are the key components to making sure that your theme resonates with the audience?
Making sure it makes sense, making sure that you follow through, making sure that you ask questions that mean something, because people don't want to consume a story that doesn't mean anything. There's got to be something deeper than, yes, we want to be entertained, but there's got to be something deeper than that, because the entertainment, I can take it or leave it. You can always put down a story once you're done being entertained. But if you're making your audience feel something because your story means something, then it's something that's going to stick with them.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I would add to that too, is that basically this ties back a little bit. I think we were talking about last week, but with Lion King, but it's a little different, because with Lion King, when the phrase I was going to say is don't lie and be honest. But with Lion King, that's a little bit more about fairy tale and myth, versus Iron Giant is not very fairy tale myth. I can get very literary analysis on what I think it belongs to, but that's, weird headcanon literary nerd stuff. The real nerd stuff is, and I go to a college and I teach a class kind of nerd stuff. But in this case, I think it ties into the sense of, and I've been thinking about this with a lot of animated films lately, which are not all bad, by the way. They're not all bad, but I think it needs to apply to the audience. But that doesn't mean, oh well, I'm not a woman, therefore the theme does not resonate with me, a male. That's not what I mean. What I mean is, I think it needs to be something that's, it's not a fancy lie. So let's take in this way, right? What I think is interesting about the sword and sorcery stories is Conan's problems are never going to be my problems. They're pure fantasy, right? Because he's a big, muscular, somewhat amoral, mostly somewhat, I don't know, whatever, up for debate. barbarian going around a world of violence and sex, killing people. His problems are not my problems. So when those stories, there are interesting analysis of human stuff, but it's never going to really stick with me per se in that way. If you're trying to find something that really sticks with an audience, I think it needs to be something that's actually real. So in The Iron Giant, you are dealing with things that are real. For example, the government does not have your best interests at heart. That is very real. Hogarth is clearly a lonely kid. That is resonant. The idea of outsiders, because there's even this, Dean is a beatnik. So he's clearly not really of this 50s society. There's elements of that. And the giant, of course, is an outsider. You have questions of the soul, because there comes a time when a kid learns they're going to die. These are real resonating elements. That doesn't mean that things have to get super, super serious all the time for your story to work thematically, but basically it has to be something that we can connect to and be realistic versus, I don't want to kick something while on the ground. I have to use this example. I saw Wish, right? The Disney movie from 2023, I think it was. Okay. So stick with me here. So I saw that movie trailer and I said, that doesn't look very good. I've seen a lot of this a million times. And everyone was like, no, it's gonna be. I'm like, okay. Movie came out, everyone trashed it. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna see it, I wanna know. We don't have time to get into it, but something that really kind of bugged me was with the heroine. I felt with that movie, the heroine just, she wanted to take care of, I think her grandpa, and she had a house, and she had a mom, and she wants to be the wizard's great new mentor, which now sounds like Wicked now that I think about it. That's weird. And all these big things that she had, her little goat, she had her little goat pet friend, and this and that, and friend group, and I was like, I don't know, I feel like older, not every older, but I feel like it didn't really click as an idea that of a character that people could really click with, versus say, well, recently, Rapunzel, Entangled, what's her thing? She wants to go outside. Everyone can relate to that. I've always felt that Rapunzel, the story of Rapunzel, would make for a great modern version of a fairy tale, because basically it's what we're doing right now. Social, media, the internet, but we're not outside. It's like Rapunzel trapped in a tower. That's something we can all connect to. So in that movie, there is a lyric of saying, the song, her opening song is "When Will My Life Begin?" Holy crap, I can feel that. I can feel that as a kid. I can feel that as a teenager. I can feel that as an adult. That's something I think that's a little bit resonant now versus, I'm not saying that Wish, the idea of not wanting to take care of your grandpa or try to be someone bigger is not resonating. But I don't think I think it's kind of, how many people do you know feel that? Versus I think the best of these kinds of stories do tackle into something that not everyone can relate to, so it's universal, so it's on brand, but something a little bit deeper than just simple problems. It's kind of like back to, I've always complained about this, original Spider-Man always had money problems. He always had money problems. Money problems. And when I read that as a kid, I'm like, I totally relate to that. Versus Spider-Man today, he's basically, oh geez, the prom. Oh no. And it's like, that's not a thing. But I think Iron Giant does that well because there are things we've already thought about before running in the wheels of our heads, and the movie brings them forefront. Again, I think I rambled there. I apologize, everyone. I'm in a weird mood today. Sorry.
I think this brings up an interesting point, which I feel like we've talked about before a lot, but does your thematic statement have to resonate universally, or can it just resonate with one person? Another question that's kind of married to that one is, can your story have multiple themes depending on who's watching it and what perspective they're watching it from? Because it is important to tell stories even for smaller groups of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But you're
Absolutely.
telling it around a human thing, no matter how many people experience that human thing, it's still a human thing.
Yeah. So actually, that's an interesting idea because there is a movie that has not, in recent years, that has not gotten a lot of attention for some God knows what reason, which is called Turning Red. Have you seen this movie from Pixar?
Yes.
I need to.
So Turning Red is freaking excellent. Put it this way: it is an animated film that talks about periods.
Oh.
It is a real, and I watched this, and me and my sister, and we're like, "Did we literally just see that? Can you actually do that?" You know, because blah, 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 right? But that is a movie that is about an Asian girl hitting puberty. I am not an Asian girl hitting puberty, so not every single specific thing can fit. So I think back to kind of my wish comment was, I think the thing is that movie tried to be fairy tale universal, but then maybe kind of had something weirdly that no one really clicks with, versus that movie was very personal and very microscopic. So I think that's a really good point there, because honestly the thing is like, let's not tap dance around the point here. This movie has a very specific comment about guns. By that definition, somehow, some way, there are now people. No. Trust me, you can read old articles about this movie back in 1999 and such, and there were comments about that. I'm like, yeah, this movie's like this. No, this movie's like that, and blah 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 blah. So I do think you have to write. You can write for a specific group, because this group needs to have conversations. Look at my skin color here. That's a whole thing we can get into later.
Mm-hmm.
You said something else, Janlong. I'm sorry. My brain. It's this movie. It's this movie's fault. I swear. Multiple themes. Yeah, multiple themes.
Just the concept
multiple themes.
You can have different themes because everyone's going to watch a film, experience a story through their own perspective. And not everyone has the same perspective. This is why representation is so important, such a hot topic in the media world today, because there are people who have different skin colors, have different life experiences, have different values. They all deserve representation. They all deserve to have stories that touch their hearts and that they can say, me too. But with that said, can you have multiple thematic elements or thematic statements within one story? Can you have, for example, for Iron Giant, I think there are several themes that you can choose which one you relate to. Mm-hmm. Whether that be you get to choose who you want to be, whether that be don't trust the government, whether that be there's something after death, everything has a soul. All these different things, you can go down the list of depending.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No, there's a part for that. So
don't spoil it. Okay.
For that, I was going to say, I think what's significant about, I think this movie does a really good example is basically, I think you can have multiple themes. I think multiple themes in a story create the conversation. So I think this is something I think is really important, is that a story is not just one line. It's layers of lines. And I mean, we joke about this, all the time, where it's like, ogres are like onions, they have layers. But really, hilarious joke aside from Shrek, that is true. There are things that have layers. But I think what's interesting is that those layers create the whole enchilada of the theme. So you have soul, gun, guns kill, you don't have to get a gun, Superman, and aliens, and it combines into the Iron Giant, the one thing. So I think, honestly, having themes, first of all, I think themes come from character, what characters are dealing with.
For sure.
It's not just the one character's conflict does not overlay everything. I think there are multiple elements there, but I think you can and will naturally have multiple themes, and it will become the one conversation of the story. Honestly, I can't even imagine a story with a single theme.
Yeah.
I don't even think there's one that exists.
Which always drove me crazy. Because, in high school, middle school, whatever it may be, in English class, they have you sit down and fill out the paper. What is the theme? What is the, whatever it may be. You had to just fill in the blank. And apparently there was only one right answer.
Yeah. Like to that end, I'm thinking like Shakespeare, right? What about Macbeth? Power is the terribleness of going after power, and it's like, okay, yeah, but it's Macbeth. For Lord's sake, there's like more stuff going on than just the one thing. So yeah, it's
for me. I think that when it comes down to it, at least this is the way that I approach stories. I don't know if I definitely know there's always more than one theme to every story. When I position a story in with a thematic statement, I always look at a thematic statement as kind of like the structure that is the house. And then you have all of these other things that you can hang on that house. You have shingles, you have windows, you have those types of things, and those are other themes that can hang on that bigger overwhelming theme. So I think when people talk about what's the theme, I think they're generally aiming for that one clear thing, this one statement that is trying to make, and then all of what does that one statement sprout? Because that's the interesting thing about thematic statements is they oftentimes spark other conversations that can be had around that. And if this means this, then this must mean this. And if that means that, then could it mean this? And now you've got all of these different themes that are coming out of the story. But I think your guiding light, your North Star in whatever story you're telling, that's, I think, is your thematic statement. And I do think that there is a difference between a thematic statement and themes. In the sense of like themes to me feel like the attributes of a story, while a thematic statement is the soul of the story. So that in that sense, I think that's kind of what people are referring to. At least that's what I would think it is. All that being said, let's move on to the next section. How does the Iron Giant nail these mechanics? So Jaylon was already going down the list of the types of themes that are in the story. Some of the ones that stand out most, in addition to what she was talking about, is you are who you choose to be, which I think might be the thematic statement of this entire film. But on top of that, you have, fear versus choice, the Cold War paranoia versus the giant's innocence. We have the danger of labels, weapons versus the protector. And then, like I said, based on some of the stuff that you guys were talking about as well, what are some other themes that you guys saw that we can add to this list before I get into the discussion questions around these themes?
I already spoiled it, so I'm going to let you.
She's like, I've said enough.
I think something that was always I want to clarify, because again, I adore this movie and like I can go around. So could you clarify the question one more time for me, Jared, so I can stay on a leash?
I'm just asking, what other themes besides the ones that I mentioned did you guys pull from the film?
Something that always kind of really hit me with the movie in general was this feeling of, I'm trying to word it, like you have to kind of try a little bit to get things moving forward. So something I've always found was really fascinating in this movie was that the giant becomes this rumor, and the two hunters, right, they have seen the giant and they don't like freak out like a bunch of jerks. They freak out, panic, because there's a giant freaking robot in the woods. So they run away, but they're not inherently jerks. And the kids find the giant in their climax through their binoculars, and they don't think it's terrible. And then the giant saves them, and the town looks at them, and everything's kind of fine. They're fine with them, and then the army comes and starts blowing them up. But once the general knows what's really up, he changes his mind. But I've always thought it was very interesting that everyone has to, you don't have to rush things, but you can take a little bit to get to know something different. Just these little lessons. You don't have to rush it like that. It's little baby steps. And so the giant, you'll notice too, can't really talk, and in the end, he's speaking fully. And so we go from something I've always thought was interesting too was the fact that Hogarth eventually tells the giant, you don't have to be a gun, etc., etc. But if you notice, when he's going out for the invaders from Mars, he's going out to hunt like a good old 50s boy, but he also has a gun, and I think his outfit is very like militaristic 50s commando comics. And I always thought that was very interesting of that concept that Hogarth, when push came to shove, he did the good old 50s boy gun thing by instinct. And that was the start of it. In the end, he says to the giant, I love you. But it takes a little bit of time to get to that point, but it's okay to show your face. So, basically the giant shows his face and stuff happens, but it's not the end of everything. And I think, again, where a lot of that comes from is the telling of just what would this character do? Dean reacts this way. Hogarth reacts this way. The general reacts this way, and creating a different plot. Because you'll notice, in terms of structure, the climax is not just let's go kill the giant robot. Let's go kill the giant robot. It's trying to get people to communicate and figure things out a little bit. So your theme is now influencing your fantastic climax. So that's something that always really stuck with me. And I also think, just in that sense, this is kind of part of the parcel there, but something I always really deeply appreciated is Hogarth telling the giant, you don't have to be a gun, in terms of like, I have no idea where the giant came from. Well, holy crap. This thing could kill everyone. But he doesn't have to be, even though everything about him is death and destruction. And I always thought, I guess what I'm saying too is this is also about design. Because I think it might have been intentional, but you'll notice too, when the giant goes super duper crazy on the army, he's got like these almost Cobra-esque tentacles for laser beams, which is very much War of the Worlds with tripods, which is like, I know it's a science fiction story, but to me will always be a horror story, but that's a different conversation for another day. And that kind of alienness of everything about him is death, but he doesn't have to be it for starters, which I always thought was a nice touch. So basically, design can also influence theme, just on that little laser Cobra thing. Again, Jared, I hope it makes sense. You're talking. I'm rambling on, I feel. I'm so sorry, everyone.
Nope, you're good. It's all good.
You're bringing up good points. Another way to word that theme that I saw was acceptance. Because sometimes, like you said, you do need time. As Hogarth told the giant, the town's not ready for you yet. You need to have the right timing, have the right approach. But also, push comes to shove, people just need to be willing to give something a chance and not just make judgments about it without understanding. And being able to offer that understanding in a way that is easily ingestible is part of what good storytelling is. So I think another thing that this story helped to foster as far as empathy goes in the people that watched it was we can be accepting to something that on the outside doesn't look like something we want to accept. And I mean, friendship is another theme, because both the giant and Hogarth were very lonely, and they both wanted a friend, and it took, at first it was, Hogarth was just as scared as everyone else of the giant that was eating metal and was humongous. But after he saved his life, that was the first gesture of communication that the giant understood was, you are my friend. You don't mean me harm because you saved my life.
I agree with that. I wonder this. Would you say, with all of the themes we discussed, how do you feel the contrast between Hogarth, the giant, and then Kent Mansley, the antagonist of the story, reinforce the themes that we've talked about? specifically, more specifically, I would even say the thematic statement of "you are who you choose to be." How do you feel that there was the contrast between these three characters are? I have thoughts on it, but I want to hear what you guys think before I say what I think.
I would say Hogarth chose to be a friend to the giant, and he chose to protect him. And then Kent Mansley, this was an interesting thing for as far as developing villains goes that I noticed was he chose his own ego, his own what he wanted his reputation to be as someone to be taken seriously at his job, and to be this big government man that can be lauded as the savior of the United States in the midst of this Cold War. So that's the persona that he chose, and that caused him to make a very stupid mistake that doomed everyone. And for the giant, obviously, I mean, it was already said, he chose not to be a gun, even though he was designed to be, and he was triggered into using that design. He still made a choice.
Yeah, I would add to that I find Mansley, first of all, great character, great villain, but something I've always thought was interesting was he's one of the few kind of villains in general, but I'm going to specify as an animated villain who gradually changes in a really natural way where he goes from being funny to not so funny. And the only one I can think of that is Gaston from Beauty and the Beast, because basically he's funny. Gaston is this big funny character. In the end, he's like beating the crap out of the Beast. He's a bad person, but he's still the same guy. It's interesting with Mansley, it's the same thing, is that he presents himself as being really, authoritative and that perfect man, which is interesting, by the way. He's almost like he's, in comparison, Guillermo del Toro with The Shape of Water would kind of do a spin on Kent Mansley for an R-rated audience with that movie's villain. So there's an interesting, for any English majors out there, go watch these two movies and do a comparison contrast between those characters. But I think what's interesting with that is that in terms of it goes back to choice, but I also think it's kind of his nature, because Mansley is this pathetic wannabe guy that we love to laugh at, and then he threatens Hogarth, chloroforms him. Or is it chloroform? Or is that and something gets very, very dark, but it is that sense of that is his inner nature that he starts to act on more when he doesn't get what he wants. And he keeps going until he makes it worse and worse and worse, because he does stop trusting, believing in other people and other things. Because in the end, he, it's all about America, but he says, and I quote, "Screw our country. I want to live." Yeah. So it is an interesting thing that basically I find, as a compliment to what you said, Jay, is that he starts as a funnier villain and becomes more menacing by giving in to the parts of himself that are always there, just under the surface of it. So you get to keep the same character, evolve him, but as a contrast, Hogarth, as I said, doesn't stick with what his instincts tell him to do. Because at first he was just going to take a photograph and, I don't know, make a money or something, clearly. But he matures as a person because there is something inside him that's not just a little kid, but something bigger. So,
that is getting into character arcs, which I was going to say is the basis of where you find your theme.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And I agree with that. I think that's this is okay. So here's what I honestly think about the whole situation. I think you have to look at, when we talk about thematic statements and we say, okay, a thematic statement says this. This is one of the reasons why I always say create a thematic statement scale, where you have an extreme view of something and and then a four, extremely for and extremely against points, and then you put your characters along that scale. The reason why is because you get something like this, where you have this idea of, in this case, it's not so much you can choose who you want to be versus you have no choice over who you want to be. It's less about that, but it's more about the decisions that have to be made when we do choose who we want to be. Because when it comes to, specifically in this case, Kent and the Giant, Kent is an example of what happens when you choose poorly of who you want to be. That if you get so wrapped up in the identity of what you think you should be, and push that to its absolute limit. His idea is not just that he's, this government man, but he believes that he has a responsibility. He believes that he is, he's this self-important individual, and this identity that he's given himself really, is what leads him to make all these drastic decisions and do these terrible things. And then you have the Giant, who ultimately makes a decision to do the opposite. And while I would say that, the Giant feels like, in a lot of ways, the Giant feels like the main character of the story, the real main character of the story is really, in my opinion, Hogarth. And then Hogarth is in between these two. Because you have the Giant who chooses, in essence, to be good, even though he was designed to not be. And then you have Kent, who is chosen to pursue this destructive path in the sake of, holding on to this identity that's been given to him. And then you have Hogarth in the middle, who at the beginning of the film is really struggling to try to figure out who he's supposed to be in the grand scheme of things, where he's worried about what the other kids think about him, and he's all those kinds of things. And it's Dean is the one that ultimately tells him, you don't have to worry about what anybody thinks about you. You can be who you want to be. And then, of course, he goes on to tell the Giant that, and that leads to this cool thing. But I just think that's a really cool example of how the scale can work in general, and why I do personally advocate for why you should create a thematic statement in your stories and make a scale and put your characters on it. I will die on that hill, so do it.
If it's all right, I do have 3 very important additions to this conversation, but it'll put a detour on your list itinerary there. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so I was going to say, Brad Bird did say that line, "You are who you choose to be," him and the story team developed that line as a way to basically have the statement of the movie said without it being big. So something he said is they designed it to where Dean just says it in a conversation, rather than, as a lot of modern animated films I've seen, good and bad, will go like, "This is the theme right here, the moment, music." So I think something else you can do with your story is you don't have to bring attention to the theme. Let the audience find out for themselves. Yeah. Not because they're smart necessarily. I mean, audiences are smart, but not just because of that. But it allows them to have fun, to go find out for themselves. The second thing I was going to say is, in terms of thematic statements, it's also interesting that this movie's development came from Brad Bird having a question, which was specifically, what if a gun had a soul and it didn't want to be a gun? So that's where all of this movie came from. So I was going to say, in terms of thematic statement, that's also an option you can do too. Have a question and find that statement.
That was going to be my answer to one of Jared's last questions.
Sorry. And the final thing,
on the same page.
I may be jumping the gun a little bit this year. No pun intended.
No pun intended. Okay.
But something else I think is important in terms of where, because I guess what I'm thinking if I'm listening to this podcast right now, I'd be thinking, well, where do themes come from? Is apparent and I hope I'm getting this 100% right, because if not, then there's like a record of me getting wrong about one of my favorite filmmakers, and Brad Bird's going to chastise me. He doesn't know I exist. I wish he did. Anyway. There is the story of this movie is basically Brad Bird had his sister who died, I believe, by her husband with a gun. She was murdered with a gun, and this sent him to a really, really dark place. And when he got the Iron Giant project, it was very, very different. It was a musical. No one knew what to do with it, and he came up with that question: what if a gun had a soul and didn't want to be a gun? From his own experience. The reason I also bring this up too is that was actually back in the day what I really took away from Saving Mr. Banks, because I never really connected that you could take your own self and put it into the theme of the story. And that movie does it really well. even, by the way, all that, the last monologue that Walt Disney has in that movie, all that stuff about him and Roy and their dad, and that's all true. Probably why Walt himself was a little.
What was
so
that? ADHD. It explains everything.
Yeah, and I think that's something that always resonated with me with that movie, and it is the origin of this movie that I just adore. So I think something you can start is instead of having an I am a writer, I'm Herman Melville, I'm going to write the great. So don't be Ayn Rand, guys. Okay, don't be a monster. But take from yourself of what you're seeing and what you're feeling, and think about that, and also let it develop. Without tooting my own horn here, there was one of my major projects that I've talked about before. When it first started, it was a totally different theme. And then I did this little thing called thinking and living. And then I said, let's adjust this, because that's not what the story's really about anymore, nor is it how I feel. So there's so many ways you can tackle this. I hope this was not a tangent, but hopefully an additional point to this conversation, Jared. If I'm ruining your podcast today, I'm so sorry.
You were definitely
You're doing great.
I would say, okay, so my other question would be, would the story's message work as well if the setting wasn't Cold War America?
Ooh.
Yes.
I don't think it would be as powerful, but it could work.
I think. Could it not be as powerful? I'm not sure, because I've seen people do some crazy stuff.
Fair.
But I don't think it would be as. I don't want to say not as interesting, because I still think this would work. I think if the giant crashed now on the planet, I still think it would work. And I'm not talking about because of the internet. Side note, why is it we're going to make something modern just be social media? I don't understand that with stories. That doesn't make any sense to me. There's a million different things in our world. Hell, just like video games, people. Anyway, sorry, that was something different. But I think you need the 50s as a backdrop for the metaphor of it all. Because remember, this movie came out in 1999. If the Cold War was pretty much done, the 50s were certainly gone, so the imagery of Sputnik, duck and cover, I mean, put it this way, when I was a kid, because I had the VHS of this movie and that's how I knew it, my VHS came with a little Iron Giant action figure, which is gone. I don't know where it went. I'm so sad. I wish I could still. It was this big and it was so wonderful. Anyway, but I remember, the whole little Atomic Holocaust thing, which, side note, by the way, when I finally got to see this in the theater, which was amazing, by the way, for whatever reason, when suddenly, without warning, Atomic Holocaust, I started laughing out loud in the theater, and no one else was. So I saw this with my brother and my sister, and my brother always says, he goes, well, he thinks Atomic Holocaust is hilarious, because I don't know why I was laughing so hard. Anyway. But I remember as a kid, I was like, duck and cover, what the hell? But my mom was like, yeah, that was what they told us, So it was really far away, and I think the 50s setting kind of becomes the fairy tale, once upon a time in a faraway land, of the story, because I think it allows the conversations to be a little bit more kind of acceptable, because I feel like sometimes we don't really like stories about now to be about now. That's not entirely true, and that's a different conversation, but I don't know, that's how I feel. So I think it would still work, but I think it wouldn't be as easily digestible, if that makes sense.
It's harder to hear you're still doing it wrong, as opposed to we did it wrong in the past, let's be better.
Yeah. Because it's almost like you trick the audience into going, oh, wait a second, we do that today, we better change it. Versus if it's this, it's like, well, I don't do that. I don't. So I think it's kind of like the spoonful of sugar, Mary Poppins thing, everyone. It allows it to go through a little bit easier for the audience. I'm not entirely sure if I'm correct about that. That's my gut reaction.
I feel like the time period, I mean, first of all, it was so fun for me because even though I didn't live through that time period, I'm a history buff, and so that just seeing like everyday life back then was really neat. There were like so many little details, like the Twinkies in the bread box thing, that they made me smile, and it was something that it was like little gold nuggets that I was excited about. But I do think that that time period added to the metaphor of the story. And that's why I say it made it more powerful, because without that metaphor, it's harder for people to grasp onto the concepts, the conversations that the film is trying to open up.
I think that's interesting. I think you guys make good points as far as that goes. I agree. I don't know if it would work personally. I don't know if it would work as well, which makes me think that when it comes to when you're trying to craft a theme, and this is a quick hack for writers that I recommend that I've done, and I think that it may not work for everybody, but if you ever feel like, because I'm a firm believer in starting your story with a theme in mind or a thematic statement in mind. I know a lot of people don't believe in that. A lot of people think you should, write your shit and then whatever bubbles to the top is what you were really trying to say. I find that it's more cohesive if you start from the beginning that way. But in that, sometimes if you're trying to figure out what you want to say, take a notebook, a small little memo notebook or journal or whatever, and whenever you have a thought about the way the world is, or things you come across in the world, people that you come across with, any opinions that you have, just write that opinion down. And just basically make a notebook of those opinions, because all of those opinions become thematic statements, and you can ultimately tell a story. And then you just say, what characters and what situations would help me to tell this statement? And ultimately, it's the easiest way to get themes for days, because we all have it. We all scrolling through TikTok, walking around, going to the mall, going to the movies, watching stuff, whatever it is. We all have opinions and thoughts about the things in the world that we interact with every day. And so just taking a note of that, it also helps you mentally to connect with your own feelings and thoughts about situations, but also it's stuff that you can use as an artist for your work. So you should definitely do that. All that, let's talk about the climax of this story. So the climax was a powerful thing. It was one, as opposed to I forget what we watched, where it wasn't that great. Most recently, Superman. Ironically enough, where we talked about the climax kind of.
That's a really interesting point. I've never actually made that connection before between the two climaxes of that. Huh.
Right. So with the climax of Superman kind of falling apart and this one really coming together, I think this is a great example. My question for you guys is, why do you feel, and I have not many, but I have some thoughts about this as well, but why does Superman hit so hard emotionally within this story?
I want to plug the entire Superman podcast episode that we recorded.
Even though most of the hosts in there have very wrong opinions. That's my
only one. It was only me who had a wrong opinion.
No. There were more than just one, and it wasn't just you. It was all of you. Anyway, I'm sorry. Honestly, I'm actually kind of thinking back from when I was a kid, to now, is that this movie has such a wonderful childish perspective of Superman, which is interesting because the 50s era of Superman was ridiculously childish in the most wonderful of senses. It's insane. But I think what's kind of funny is in this movie, Hogarth basically describes Superman and says, "You're the good guy, like Superman." And when they're flying, Hogarth can't help but say, "Put your arms straight there like Superman." And I think what works about that is that the giant just sees this guy who can fly and be amazing, and he chooses to do good. And kind of is an interesting detail about our connection to the Superman podcast is something I always loved, or not always loved. I actually grew. I grew to love this about Superman. Is that Batman, of course, has the tragic. No one's ever gonna let the hurt like I do, which is brilliant. That's brilliant. I adore Batman's origin. I adore that point. I think it's very powerful. What Superman I always thought was interesting was that he just got raised by good people in a good place, and you know what? Clark just happened to be good,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what propels him to do good. That you can just be a nice guy, a nice person, and just do something. And I think that's what makes this movie work, is that the Giant chooses to be Superman in the sense of just being the good guy. No complicated comic book lore or literary analysis. I think there's a simplicity to Superman, like the very basic, not even bones, like what's deeper than bones? Veins, organs, I don't know what the body metaphor would be. The very basic foundation of the character works in the spirit of it. So I think the thing, and of course there's, Superman comes from the stars, and he's an alien, but he's one of us. That's great, that's wonderful. But I think for me, why it works is that it's this childish spirit of there's a man who can fly, and he's invincible, and yada yada yada, and he's a good guy. The end. And I think that's that purity of it, I think, is what infects the movie, where it's like, well, what's the Giant? He's a robot that came from space, and he's a good guy. The end. But of course, Mansley can't accept that because of his own ego, and yada yada yada. And that's how I've always felt about it. And by the way, I just want to throw out here, the climax of this movie is amazing, but every time he slides off, he's falling, goes and rockets up.
Mm-hmm.
It's the most thing in the world.
I need you to understand that when I watched this with my little brother a couple days ago, he bawled his eyes out for like 20 minutes after this movie was over because of the climax. Yeah. And then, like my mom said, 2 days later, he is still trying to process how sad the climax was.
I mean, when I saw this in the theater, it was so crazy because, the Giant's saying goodbye. And I remember just like very naturally, I quoted, "I love you." Like I'm looking at the screen, I just say it quietly. And then it was amazing. Oh my gosh, I adored this movie so much.
I cried too. I mean, I cry at a lot of good movies, but I really cried at this one. And yeah, powerful full circle moments too get me, like where he told, because you had that whole scene where Hogarth it was supposed to be humorous, but Hogarth was trying to get him to understand, like, I need to go home, you need to stay here, you can't follow me home. And then the Giant, you had that full circle moment where everything Hogarth had told him about communicating, teaching him words, and then circles back to that moment and plays it in a different tone by the Giant telling him, you stay.
Which I think is an interesting structural, emotional payoff. Because it's structural because, look, remember that thing? Here's the payoff. That's structural, but it's also emotional because now there's character. Because the Giant does understand and he has grown. So there's a good example of emotional payoffs. Which, me referencing that, is also a circular thing.
There you go.
I think that the Superman thing hits so hard for me because when I realized all the parallels between Superman and the Giant, that in some comic book runs, Superman is sent to Earth to conquer it. So it's it's his choice to not be a weapon. Superman chooses to not be a weapon, partially because yes, he's raised by good people, but. And in essence, the Giant is the same way. The Giant is, in so many words, raised by Hogarth to be good when he could be bad. The other interesting dynamic is that with Hogarth telling the Giant, the town's not ready for you yet, reminds me so much of Jonathan Kent telling Clark, the world's not ready for you to go out there because they're going to be afraid of what you are and how you would react. In fact, in the movie, regardless of what anyone thinks about it, in the movie The Man of Steel is a great example of how this whole thing plays out, where you do have Jonathan telling Clark, you can't if the world sees what you can do, they're going to do terrible things to you. And then the moment that, Superman does sort of step out into the world and shows himself, the government does exactly. And granted, they do it for a different reason than what they do in this movie, but it is panic, it's mania, it's humans being humans deciding, oh, we have to kind of freak out because something that we're not familiar with is here and we have to react to it. And so these parallels of kind of this being from a faraway world coming to our world and to potentially be a weapon against it, ultimately learning and making the decision to be better and protect it, I think is an interesting parallel, and I found it. I liked it a lot in that sense. And then there were just those moments of like from the off the cliff, flying back up into the air to when he left to go stop the rocket. Those moments that felt very Superman-esque, all within themselves. And I didn't cry in this movie, but I understand why people did. It was definitely, and that's not a whole, I promise you that's not a bravado thing. I bawled my eyes out the other day watching Matlock. So trust me, I'm not this macho man. I have issues. I'm sorry. But anyway, the point is, I thought it was fantastic. The last question I'll ask you guys before we jump into Devil and Angel's Advocate, what is the difference? And this sets up for that. But what is the difference between a cheap emotional moment and an earned emotional payoff?
I was going to say how many seeds were planted and then how many grew. But that's an analogy that I kind of have to explain. But when you plant...
Wait.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Let me ask this question slightly different.
Okay.
Not only what is the difference between a cheap emotional moment and an earned emotional payoff, but how do you know if in your work in progress you have done one or the other?
Now that's a little bit harder because you really do need... I would say if it has emotional payoff for you, then there's a very good chance it's going to have an emotional payoff with another human. Mm-hmm. But you kind of do need that outside perspective because sometimes you might be thinking things from your perspective in your head that you are projecting into your work, but it may not actually be there in the full way that it is in your head with you projecting your understanding on what you've written. So that's where you need another person as eyes. You need an editor, you need a coach, you need a beta reader, someone.
And where can people find wonderful editors?
Hey, well, just so happens we're always looking for really good stories to read, so hit one of us up. We got our 30-minute free consults, and we would love to hear about your story and let you know if it makes us cry.
Wow, that's amazing. And what's the website for that?
Hey, check us out at www.ovaconnect.com.
Wow, I can't fail.
Fantastic. Now I don't have to do that next.
I
would add to that for me, I know I done goofed with that when I review something and I just look at it and I go, this is not written by me. This is written by someone else. I think it's definitely working when a character says something or there's a character moment and I go, the character did it, not the writer. That's something that's really, really significant is it because I really can't stand a lot of film discourse. I can't stand practically all film discourse now. But you're on a podcast talking about movies. Shut up. That's why Robin Williams.
I do it better.
Yeah, but I do it better. I have the degree to prove it. But it's not just the degree anyway. But something I really can't stand is people will look at these movies and they'll go like, "Well, the point is really dumb, and this is really predictable," and they won't give movies the time of day. But I will say, I think actually Charlie Kaufman, the screenwriter, said something about this that always really stuck with me. He said, if you write something that is fake and it's not from you, you've wasted my time. And that always really stuck with me. And I think he actually put that in his movie adaptation, where it's if you're gonna be fake about something, you've wasted my time. And I think that's what's always driven me nuts about a lot of these animated films. I don't want to say now, but honestly, it's been around since at least 30 years by this point. Where it doesn't, things feel like almost like a homework assignment, or like kids playing with toys, but not in a good way. So like here's an interesting thing of contemporary is Quest for Camelot. Right? Has anyone seen Quest for Camelot?
Mm-mm.
Okay, so Quest for Camelot was Warner Brothers' first. Hey, Lion King made almost $1 billion. We can just churn this out. It's a childhood movie I've seen a lot. It's okay. It has not aged well. But for me, a lot of that movie, the movie is just kind of one big fight, and the bad guy, I don't know, like, the heroes trick him into defeating himself, and it's like, you can't, I watch it. I know a lot of people are like, and that's fine. It's just for me. I watch it, and it's like, okay, whatever. You know, it's not like a big moment. It feels kind of forced, or not forced, but just it's just by the numbers. Versus the Iron Giant, this feels like the people that are pouring their heart and soul out to it, and they're not thinking about you. They're thinking about themselves, how they feel about it, because it's almost like, in a weird way, the writers push away the audience and thusly bring them on equal ground. It's a really weird phenomenon, but that's the closest I can think of. But I think ultimately you can know something is manufactured and it's not a true payoff when you just look at something and you go, okay, whatever. Or to quote The Simpsons, that's all well and good for sheep, but what are we to do? You know, you're questioning it. But if it's honest and emotional and you believe it, you go, brah. You know. So actually, here's a really good example. The Dungeons and Dragons movie, Honor Among Thieves. You start to pick up what the climax of that movie is going to be with the conversation about resurrecting the dead wife/mom. And it totally works. I won't spoil it, but you start to see it and you go, yeah, that feels honest. So when certain characters are in certain positions, it doesn't feel like, and now the hero is going to do a heroic thing and I get my $1,000,000. It feels like, oh, that does make sense. That's what it should be. That's what the characters would do. That's when you know. And if it doesn't happen, you're writing. Honestly, I've learned in my experience, it might not even be that your very foundation isn't working. You might have just tripped a few times. So kind of back up a few steps and see if you have to go left instead of right. That's something I've kind of found out where, like, I'll go back and I'm like, it's not wrong, but where did the thing go wrong? And I look at a line and I go, that line doesn't work. And once I get rid of it, I go, oh, okay, well, now this makes a little bit more sense. I just did that last night, actually, where I was looking at it, I'm like, no, that doesn't, wait, let's change this word to this word. And suddenly it kind of worked out.
I like what you said. I think it's so key to have these moments be between characters, something a character does as opposed to something the writer says. That's how you make it not feel forced. And the foundation should be your character arc. When you have a character arc, he's starting out believing something, life throws struggles at them, and they have to ask a question and figure out what the answer is. And that, when you set up your character arc like that, the questions you ask lead naturally to answers. They lead naturally to conversations, which contribute your themes, and then it leads to the answer, and that core question and answer is your thematic statement. And when you have the characters exploring this conversation and going through these struggles as characters, as people, then that's going to give you structure. It's going to make it not feel forced, and it's going to plant all the seeds in those character moments that give you that emotional payoff at the end.
Agreed. I agree. I don't have anything to add. to that particular part. You guys covered pretty much everything that I would have said in that particular case. So fantastic. So let's go over our devil and angel's advocate hot take debate. So the way that this thing works is basically I am going to throw out a hot take, and you guys are, one of you is going to be our devil and the other is going to be our angel for the week. So in this particular case, because Charles is so enamored by this film.
I freaking knew you were going to do this to me.
Oh, I saw this coming. This is the climax I was seeing building up to.
So
We've done it well. We gave you an entire case study here.
So because of that, I'm going to make Charles our devil for this, and Jaylon, you will be our angel. So here is our hot take for the day. The ending of The Iron Giant is just emotional manipulation disguised as good storytelling.
Wait, so I'm angel, I'm arguing for this?
You are arguing
for the correct answer?
You are arguing that this is wrong, that it is not the case, that it is a good thing. And Charles is going to be arguing that it is definitely emotional manipulation and it is not necessarily a good storytelling.
This is another good way to tie back to the Mary Poppins story.
You have to watch Mary Poppins.
Because P.L. Travers didn't want a story that made children feel like they weren't ever going to have to face real, horrible, hopeless things in this world. And so she felt like it was emotional manipulation to feed a child fairy tales that didn't have any sense of the real world sucks and you're going to have to deal with it.
Fine. Killing the giant is like the equivalent of killing the puppy. And how could anyone have thought that Mansley was the guy to say launch the missile now? There should have been the general code or something to that degree. There's setups in the movie, for example, I believe these sorts of jets didn't exist at the time or something to that degree. I've heard something like that. So there's a lot of made up situations to create this big old violent occasion. For an example, how on earth did they get nuclear subs that quickly off of the Atlantic coast? The time frame doesn't allow it work, and it all builds up to God, I hate you. It builds up to the killing the giant, like killing Old Yeller as just a way, and then of course the giant lives again, which kind of undoes the whole enchilada. It's mostly just to get Hogarth to cry and for everyone to believe in kind of a kumbaya that doesn't necessarily feel earned because this is the real world and no one is that believable in trusting things people fracking.
Okay, so
that was more entertaining. I don't need to add anything.
So I would say that Charles made a wonderful argument for that, and I believe him.
I believe you are on his chocolate pudding list.
So there you go. We fought it out. On our next episode, it'll be just me and Jaylon, and like I said, unless there's a guest that she's gonna bring on, but it'll most likely be us. So it'll just be us going back and forth, and the goal will be to convince the other that they are correct in their stance, even if you don't fully believe it. But Charles did a wonderful job at convincing us all that the Iron Giant's ending was just emotional abuse for the sake of emotional abuse, and that's that. All that being said, now that we've figured it out on our end, it's you guys' turn. Do you feel that the ending was earned or just emotional manipulation? Let us know in the comments or tag us on whatever social platform you find us on and hear this. We would love
if
to
you
get
find
your
me, do not tag me with these questions unless it is in support anti what I said. You know,
Okay, Charles, you proved your mettle as an actor.
if I had to, I could have done it.
So the final thing before we jump into before we wrap things up, we did promise you guys the 3 steps to make sure that you are landing your theme correctly. So I'm going to lay these 3 steps out for you guys, and hopefully it'll be helpful for you. So step 1, the first thing you want to do is you want to let the theme emerge through characters' choices. We talked about this. The best way to show a theme is through the character's actions. The great example of this is in the Iron Giant's arc is about his choices. He doesn't just say, I'm not a gun. He proves that he's not a gun. The question that you as a writer should be asking yourself is, how can your protagonist's choices reinforce your theme? Always be asking that. In fact, you might even want to be asking that before you start writing, like getting into the actual drafting process. Start just thinking about it. You don't have to commit to any of these things, but just start thinking about it. Step 2, weave the theme into the conflict. The core conflict should naturally bring out your theme. The example is that the Cold War paranoia versus the Giant's innocence, it creates a whole organic stage for the you are who you choose to be conversation. And so when you use the backdrop of a conflict, the things that are going on, or even the conflict that's not necessarily the backdrop, that's central to the entire story, using that to weave your theme into it is a fantastic way to really help people connect with the theme you're trying to tell. The question that you want to ask yourself is, what external forces in my story challenge my protagonist's belief system? And that should always be the goal. Your character's belief system needs to be challenged every step of the way. They do not need to be having a good time here. If your protagonist is having a good time after the opening image and after the inciting incident and things are starting to get going, if your character's having a really good time, most of the time you're doing something wrong, and you should probably reconsider it a little bit, because there's no obstacles, there's nothing that the character's getting out of.
Make your characters suffer.
Exactly. You are an overlord. Be one. Live up to it. The third step, final step, earn the emotional payoff. The climax should feel like the natural result of everything before it. It should feel like this was inevitable. Even if you don't see it coming, it should still feel like when you watch it back, oh, how did I not put all of this together? This is a perfect way to do that. An example of this is the Giant sacrifice lands because we've seen him wrestle with the idea of being a weapon throughout the movie. So when he decides to not be a weapon and quite literally sacrifice himself going up against an actual weapon, it makes emotional sense to us and it feels earned. The question to ask yourself is, does your story's ending feel like a natural, inevitable conclusion to your character's journey? When you go back to reread it, when you're editing it with your editor or you're doing it on your own, ask yourself that question. Does this feel like it should have happened all along, even if it feels like and the other thing I will say about that too is, I know sometimes we in our heads, I know me, I've gotten to the point where it's like, how do I know I'm not being predictable? Because it feels inevitable. Am I being predictable? And a lot of times I would say you're not being predictable per se. I think it's just a matter of predictability comes typically from the expectations people have about a genre, or you've telegraphed what you were going to do hardcore to the point where it's like, oh yeah, obviously that's what's going to happen. But most of the time when something is predictable, it's just the fact that people are really good at pattern recognition, and they figure out, oh, this is how stories are told, so this is likely what's going to happen. And it's not always the worst thing.
It can be very satisfying, actually.
It can be, for sure, because when something happens that you expected to happen, it feels, sometimes it can feel really good. It's like, oh yeah, I knew that was gonna happen, that's so good. Because that's just an example of good storytelling. But I wouldn't worry about it so much as you want to just make sure that it makes sense. Don't paint this picture of, these two people doing battle or building up this tension between these two characters that are going to come and have a huge battle at the end, only to have them sit down and have tea. I mean, that could work if you're trying to
if you're trying to tell that story.
If that's the kind of story you're trying to tell, but
that's
don't
your theme.
But don't. That's a theme all within itself. But I mean, don't do it in the sense of like telling us and making us believe that this is a fight, and that it's supposed to be a fight, and then it's not. That's something I would recommend not doing. All that being said, if today's breakdown helped you, imagine what we could do with personalized feedback on your own story. We work with authors all the time to fix these exact issues. So if you want our expert help, grab a free consult. We have the link in our show notes and almost everywhere else that you can find us at www.obaconnect.com. Yeah. Also, if you're working on thematic resonance, you're not quite ready for a consultation yet, but you feel like you're trying to make your theme resonate, we will have a thematic resonance blueprint quick reference guide that will be in the show notes as well as in the newsletter when this episode comes out. So grab that, use that, guide yourself through whatever process you need to, and do that and tell a wonderful story because we know you have it in you. All that being said, I'm going to do a quick fire lightning round. This is going to be, this time it is not going to be trivia, I promise. But
I'm better at trivia.
This is a quick fire thing, no explanation to the answer to the questions, and we are not allowed to ask why. It's just there. So, first one, a childhood movie that emotionally wrecked you. Go.
Oh, shoot. So many.
I mentioned Land Before Time before, so I'm going to switch it up here. Pooh's Grand Adventure, The Search for Christopher Robin.
Oh, wow. Okay. Jaylon,
I'm so bad at quickfire. I need to think this through.
No, you're not allowed. Pick a random.
Is there a rule that, like, if I don't answer in a certain number of seconds, you get to skip me?
No, we will wait
forever. Oh, no. Okay, I'm going to say Cars.
Okay, we're not allowed to ask why, so this is our version of we listen and we don't judge. Best non-superhero superhero movie.
Can I use books too?
Yes.
Because I feel like any fantasy story uses a really good superhero arc.
Oh, I didn't answer the last one, but that's fine.
Get in there. We're waiting for you.
Yeah, I have an answer for this, but I can't think of what it is.
Well, while you wait for that, I guess I'll tell you the childhood movie that broke me. The childhood movie that broke me.
Oh, dang, you have to think too. You're gonna have to edit this down.
E.T.
Okay.
But that's more because it terrified me.
That's fair.
Okay, I'm gonna cheat here and say as a story, because if it's booked, we'll show Buffy the Vampire Slayer. There you go.
Okay.
But there is one. It's gonna drive me nuts.
You said, what was your answer, Jaylon?
I cheated and said any fantasy story kind of feels like a superhero. Wingfeather Saga. I reference that all the time, but it's because it's the best.
Mine's is this. It is Vicious by V.E. Schwab. This is the greatest non-superhero book ever. I love that book. Okay, a story where the theme was too heavy-handed.
Oof.
Trying to be nice.
I'm gonna jump in first, and I'm gonna say any and all Tyler Perry movies ever. Every single one of them.
Honestly, I hate saying this because I honestly love all Disney channels and they are nostalgic to me, and they will always have, like, old Disney Channel shows will always have a place in my heart. But by definition, a lot of times those themes were heavy-handed.
Fair enough. Fair enough. That's
honestly,
that's pretty sure.
I'm gonna steal that because that's basically the ballpark that I'm in anyway.
Okay.
Some of those Disney Channel original movies. Wow.
You know what I should have said? I should have said all Christmas movies ever. I'm so sorry.
All Hallmark movies ever.
Especially
except
them.
For Muppets Christmas Carol.
Fair.
Okay.
Last one. What's a movie that made you cry, but you will never admit it? Except for today, because you're going to admit it.
Oh, no. Does it have to be a movie? Because I can list off like 20 literal kids' books that have made me cry. Yep. Like pictures.
Whatever story. Okay, that's what we'll say. What's a story that made you cry, but you'll never admit
it? Mike Milligan and his steam shovel.
I don't even know what that is, but it just sounds like
I don't know.
It is a really good children's book, okay?
See, I don't know because I'll just say it. I'm like, oh yeah, this made me really emotional. So I don't really feel weird, but I guess this is a weird comment and is weird, but the Barbie movie made me very, very emotional when I first saw that in the theater. It was just very emotional for reasons that I have personally. But
I could see that.
There's one.
I could see that
because I was gonna say Pooh's Grand Adventure, but I already said that, and that's not. He tried to poo. Yeah, okay. Well, who cares? It's freaking Winnie the Pooh. That's not a surprise, but that one here's a surprise. But I'll admit that I cried at something. So.
Oh yeah.
I would say I don't usually have a problem admitting it either. But I would have to say, Little House on the Prairie. The one time that I watched it, I don't remember what episode it was. It was quite a few, and I don't talk about it. I'm less embarrassed to admitting that I've cried about it, and more or less not wanting to admit that I watched it at all. And I know a lot of people like the Little House on the Prairie, and it's like
it was pretty good.
But I hate it, and
there were a few episodes that were really good.
I hate it, and I hate that it exists, and I hate that it made me cry. How dare you do that to me? But anyway, that's that. So that's basically where we're gonna wrap things up here for Let's Talk Stories. We hope that you had fun. If you had fun, leave a review. Make sure you subscribe. Share it with another storyteller who might need this. Next week, Charles will not be with us, but it will be me and Jaylon, and we will be talking about Creed. I have decided. We will be discussing Creed. I don't know if Jaylon, have you seen Creed?
No.
So you haven't seen any of the Rocky saga?
Have you seen Rocky? Any of the Rockies?
Okay, so my mom tried to introduce me to Rocky, and I couldn't get through the training sequences because I was just like, that's not me. I don't get it. I don't appreciate this dude shooting himself up with needles, and I hate needles, so let's not.
That was Rocky 4. That was different.
Anyway.
Don't get him
also,
started.
the Soviet Union was shooting him up, was shooting Ivan Drago with needles, not himself.
But
you're getting me to admit more things than I'm scared to admit. Stop.
No, but Creed is fantastic, and I think you should watch it. I think it's a great addition, a great entry point to the Rocky franchise if you are more interested in a more contemporary version of the boxing fighter movie. And I think we just need to have a conversation about the importance of fighter films in our life. The story, The Fire Inside, which just came out about T-Rex, what's her name? The Olympic
I know her first name was Clarissa.
Yes, her. Yes, I started that movie, didn't finish it because I got wrapped up in life. But what I did see of it was fantastic, and I think there is a very important conversation that needs to be had about fighter films. I think they're important to our culture. But
hopefully you'll be able to actually talk about that instead of me going about that series. Because I'll go so.
You left something for the rest of us to talk about. I think we still almost hit 2 hours.
Yeah, we're at about an hour and a half. So Follow us on TikTok for quick writing tips, and if you're serious about leveling up your stories, grab your free consults. Again, the link is in the show notes. And don't forget thematic resonance blueprint, that is also in the show notes. Other than that, guys, thank you for listening, and we will be back next week.
See ya.